Welcome everybody to Super Tuesday, Sisterhood Super Tuesday Health Series. Tonight we have two lovely doctors who are going to speak to us about healthy mind for the daily grind. Melanie Bilbul, Dr. Melanie Bilbul, MD, FRCPC, is a psychiatrist at the CHUM Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal. She specializes in the relation between mental and physical illness. She obtained her bachelor's in neuroscience medical degree and psychiatry residency from McGill University and her fellowship in consultation liaison psychiatry from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Dr. Sheida Rabipour received her Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in neuroscience as well from McGill University and her PhD in experimental psychology from the University of Ottawa. She then went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship at the Douglas Hospital Research Center affiliated with McGill University. I have the honor to present to you two lovely doctors. And go ahead, Melanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, that's working well. Okay, presentation mode. So thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks again for being with us here today. We're so excited to have a discussion with you guys about staying healthy and keeping a healthy mind, good, healthy daily habits. We're going to be talking on some things that touch on and overlap well with some of the other talks that have been part of the health series. So hopefully this will be a nice continuation of everyone's learning and building good skills to keep busy and healthy in our home realities these days. So Melanie.
Yes, thank you so much to everyone for having us here today. It's really an honor to be invited, and it's so nice to see so many people that I haven't seen in so long as well. So I really appreciate it. Also, just everyone saying hi to each other at the beginning too. So for our talk today, we'll be touching on, first of all, what is wellness? So what is wellness overall? Then what is stress? Then how do these two interact? So how does stress affect your body? How does it affect your brain? And then more importantly, how do we harness stress? So in times that we're going through now, how do we use the stress for some positive effect? How do we build resilience in times when the stressors just to keep on piling and are going on for months at a time? Then we'll be talking about some everyday strategies to improve wellness and increase resilience. So to start off going through what is a healthy mind? So just to go to the next slide. So this image I found was sort of very telling, because this idea of optimism being temporarily out of order. This time now, so honestly, going through COVID, a lot of unprecedented times with the global pandemic that I think all of us have had to change our lives in some ways, that we've been affected by people who are ill, people who have passed away, people have lost their jobs throughout the pandemic. And even if we maintained our jobs and having to shift from working from home, or then having children who are studying from home at the same time and having to switch our routine, not being able to see friends and family anymore. So it's really just, we've had to adapt in ways that I think, and very quickly adapt to an ever-changing world. And this has really, I think, put our sense of resilience and wellness to the test. So just to go on to the next slide. So there are many different components to wellness overall. So I think it's important to keep in mind that being mentally healthy is not just the absence of mental illness. It's not just, okay, I'm not ill, so therefore everything is going well. That there are actually many different components to wellness. So one part is feeling mentally fit in some way. So that's also being mentally healthy, but there's also different components like social wellness too. So that's also why I appreciate so much sort of seeing everyone here. And this is Grace and all the other organizers too of the Sisterhood for organizing this, because this is one way to actually maintain some social connection to people through these times. Physical wellness is another important piece too, to how to maintain physical activity in these times. People used to go to the gym. We used to be able to go to classes together or see each other in physical, like to physically exercise together. And now that's been changed in some ways too. Spiritually too. So people, for many people in this community, going to synagogue regularly was a very important thing. And now that's also had to shift too. And also our emotional wellness. So how we experience emotional wellness in these times can be very different too. what's important to keep in mind as well is that there are many different components, there are many different ways that people will experience social well-being, or many different things that people will want. So for some people, it's saying, for me, socially well might be a pleasant life. I want to just feel good overall, or a meaningful life. Some people want that instead. So they're a bit different from a pleasant life. Another concept is some people really strive for what they define as a full life. And what's interesting is that there's cultural components to it too. So that's why the slide is sort of people around the world. So just to give some examples, they asked new parents, what would you want? What sort of life would you want for your child? And the survey showed, so depending on where you were in the world, you had different ideas. So in North America, this idea that this idea of wellness is really tied to happiness. So many of the parents said, I just want my child to be happy. No matter what, just keep them happy. Whereas in some places in Eastern Europe, the idea was more, no, I would like my child to experience the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And if they haven't experienced both, they really haven't lived. Whereas for some mothers and parents in Asia, the idea was more, I would like them to feel a balanced life, a sense of calm going through life. So not extremes, not the up and down, and not just happy. So just to take a moment to sort of reflect on, for you personally, what does it mean to actually have a good life and wellness? And I think that even having that in mind sort of helps you build, even in these times of unprecedented change, how do we still maintain that and how to still work towards that?
So one of the important things that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about wellness is stress and stress management. So stress is defined as a state of mental or emotional strain that results from adverse or very demanding circumstances. And a lot of people see stress as this kind of spectrum where no stress is very good or little stress is very good. And it's just getting worse and worse until you get to states of high stress, and that's seen as kind of universally bad. But in fact, stress has an evolutionary origin. It helps us learn appropriate behaviors. So for example, thousands of years ago, our stress response evolved to help us in challenging circumstances where we might be encountered with a wild animal, for example, and that's where we come up with this fight or flight response to help us either stand our ground and fight or run away. And this response actually activates a whole circuit of regions in our brain and in our body to basically help us get our heart beating faster, get adrenaline pumped throughout our body, and get us in a state where we can really respond rapidly to these very stressful and adverse situations that we were faced with as a human race. And stress is highly subjective. So what is stressful for me might not necessarily be stressful for you, but there are some common denominators. So for example, running away from a wild animal, of course, we all need to do that to be able to stay healthy and alive. But today, although we're not necessarily faced with these types of challenges in our day-to-day lives, thankfully, there are some other very common stressors that we share. So for example, public speaking is actually something that people report fearing even more than death. So all the speakers, including Melanie and I, are very brave, obviously. The other thing that's a very common source of stress is family. So family disputes or other personal issues between friends or close family members. Work-related stress, of course, so having a lot of things to do or feeling an imbalance between the tasks and your ability to respond to those tasks. Social isolation or not feeling like you belong, stigmatization, all these things related to social interactions can also be highly stressful. And of course, these can be exacerbated by, unforeseen circumstances like a global pandemic forcing us to stay home every day. So these are all very common stressors that affect us all and affect our bodies in the same way that the original stress response affected us. And they can affect our body in many different ways. So for example, this is our immune system or different areas associated with the immune system. And stress has a profound impact on that. So people who are in high states of stress continuously, or what we call chronic stress, can actually have higher incidence of headaches, more cardiovascular issues, just generally get sick more often because our body is kind of in this overactive mode of feeling like we're being threatened by something. And it also affects the brain in a very profound way. Notably, there's 3 main regions that are affected by stress. One is in the very front of the brain. It's called the prefrontal cortex. And you can think of this as like the CEO of your brain. This is a region that is involved in helping us make decisions, understand what is appropriate behavior, regulate our emotions, and help us basically respond and adapt and live in our surroundings every day. And so when we're very stressed out, the prefrontal cortex actually seems to be underactivated. So we're not as well able to regulate our emotions. We're not able to make the best decisions. Another region is the amygdala, which is a region that is associated with fear and more generally emotion response. That's actually a region that's hyperactivated. So we're getting more kind of this feedback of, oh, we're stressed, we're in this state that we need to be hyper afraid and hyper emotional. And that's also something that's very common that happens with chronic stress. And finally, there's another region called the hippocampus, which is actually very important for memory formation. And so when we're very, very stressed out, we might actually start to see impacts on our memory formation as well, and other areas in our mental sharpness. For example, sleep. So high levels of stress are associated with sleep disorders or sleep dysfunctions. Of course, memory and also lower ability to have high mental acuity or cognitive fitness. And also, eventually, this can lead to mental health issues and even mental illness. And what's really telling, I think, about this photo in particular is that a lot of us, when we're affected by stress, we try to kind of save face. We try to deal with it and internalize it. And this can be negative for ourselves and also for people we interact with. I'll just give you one example. So there's this phenomenon called presenteeism, and it's a little more relevant to the work situation, but essentially it's being physically present somewhere, but distracted to the point of reduced productivity. And stress is a very common reason for which we might feel that we should be present, but actually are very distracted. And this can impact our productivity in our daily lives, our work, our interactions with our family, our friends, our loved ones. And so it's really important to kind of check in with yourself and kind of understand what level you are and not let stress overpower you. You know, at the same time, we've talked about how stress can be negative, and especially when we're exposed to it for a prolonged amount of time. But not all stress is bad. And in fact, it's not so much a spectrum where no stress is good and any kind of stress or more stress is bad. There's actually a curve. And actually a little bit of stress or too little stress can be just as bad for us as too much stress. And so feeling like we're not stressed out by anything actually leads us to not feel motivated to do anything. And it's the same kind of feeling of burnout that you can get when you feel overwhelmed by having too many things to do. And so there's this kind of optimal amount of stress that, again, is highly subjective. So it might look different for me than it does for you or anyone else. But this subjective good stress is called eustress. And that's actually where we have our optimal performance, or when we engage in activities in a state of flow, or a state where we're really feeling like we're on our game, we're on the ball, we're performing at our best, we're being productive, we're getting things done, we're learning. And this is extremely beneficial to us. And it's actually beneficial to our brain and our brain function as well. So eustress is actually associated with something we call cognitive reserve. So that's the idea of having these reserves of cognitive ability or mental ability that help us kind of be more resilient and act better towards adverse circumstances, like anything, like it could be environmental stressors that happen, it could be sickness or aging or anything that happens naturally in our life course. And this is associated with challenges in our lives that can be stressful. So for example, having higher levels of education, whether that's through school or through a demanding occupation, having different lifestyle habits that are challenging. So, reading, having higher vocabulary, engaging in social activities or cultural activities. And we'll touch on these in a lot more detail a bit later on. But all that to say that these are kind of the good effects of a good amount of stress. So how can we actually harness stress? The first thing to keep in mind is we can think of stress as kind of like two darts that are being thrown at us. The first dart is the actual situation that we're faced with. And often we can't control that. The situation can be anything from a pandemic hitting to anything else that happens in your daily life that we find stressful. But the second art, which is arguably just as important, if not more important, is how we think about and perceive the situation. So how are we going to respond to this stressful event? And so again, we have to keep in mind, some stress is good. So having that good amount of stress and being able to take a step back and kind of put everything into perspective can help us start on the journey of building resilience. And that is how we actually harness stress and start to kind of remove the negative aspects of stress and use stress to our own benefit.
So I'll be talking a bit about resilience now. So first of all, what is resilience? So it's an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. That's the dictionary definition. What interested me more about this was really being in New York in times of COVID. All of a sudden, sort of the whole hospital, the feeling was overall, as more and more people were coming in and we were trying to adjust to the new changes with the pandemic, was this idea of resilience, of how do we make sure that as doctors and as healthcare providers, we can all stay fit and healthy and actually be able to provide for other people too. And then also being concerned of all the people that we're treating too. How do we identify who may need more help when this is not sort of a one-time stressor? How do we identify and then also be able to help these people more? And a lot of parallels were made as well too to 9/11, which I thought was also interesting, that a lot of people were saying, you know what, we've been through a hardship before for many of the people who had been working in a hospital, then we've gone through it, we can get through this again. And so this idea really of resilience came up and was something that there were more and more talks about, and I found more and more interesting too. So this idea of how do we become resilient? Who is resilient? How can we build on this? Is this, if you are not fortunate enough to feel resilient at the moment too, or how do you actually harness that in some way? How do you bring that to the forefront and actually be able to manage through, especially now when there's no clear end in sight? I think that's the hardest thing about this stress, or many other stresses in our lives too. Sometimes you have a very clear cut stressor, and other times it might go on for months, it might go on for years. So how do we make sure that we don't sort of crumble or deteriorate as time passes by too? So to go through for the next slide about how to build resilience. So the first thing that's important is to really cultivate a belief in your ability to cope. So the way to cultivate it is to really, so there's two parts to it. The first is to recognize whatever emotion you're feeling then. So if you're feeling very overwhelmed, very stressed, take a second to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling really anxious now. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And then the second part to really cultivate the belief in the ability is to remember what are your personal strengths and resources that you have. So for some of them, and these things are things that are there regardless of the circumstances. So you know what, I might be very adaptable, or it could be my intelligence that helps me, or my sense of humor, courage, perseverance, resourcefulness. So just to try to tap into like, okay, I'm feeling a certain way now, but I actually have many of these qualities that will help me cope in this situation. And being able to sort of tell that to yourself and remind yourself of your particular qualities can be very helpful. The second thing, so this I think is going to be sort of a common theme throughout, but it's really to stay connected with sources of support. So in any way, like really just texting friends, family, even if it's short, even if it's for a brief encounter, joining things like these Zoom things if you can, even if you can't come for the whole time, even if it's really just to wave at people or see their faces, sort of anything you can do to try to have sources of support is very helpful in terms of resilience in the short term as well as the long term. And over and over, so numerous studies showing that if you have a good support system, this is really what's going to hold you through in difficult times. So to try to cultivate that in any way you can, especially in times when things have been more fragmented and there's curfews and we can't see each other. So any way to be sort of more innovative with how we connect is very important. The third thing that's important is, in order for building resilience, is really to talk about what you're going through. I think many of us, myself included, sometimes have the tendency to sort of bottle things up, and then we're, so you're in work mode, or you're in go mode, and you're like, okay, next stressor, and you don't really take the time to say, you know what, this is tough right now. And so to actually put it aside and recognize when things are going a bit more challenging is actually very important. And if you are talking to a friend, to have some space to actually talk about it, to let your friend or family member also talk about what they're going through, to leave that space really for it is very important. And the fourth point is to be helpful to others. So this is really about altruism. This has been shown again and again and sort of makes sense in the sense that if you can do something for someone else, so if you know that someone else is in trouble, to bring something to their house, to give them a call, to volunteer in some way if you can, to give charity if you can, to do something. So in some ways this also makes us feel, it makes us feel useful in some way too. You build self-efficacy, self-confidence as well in ourselves to feel, you know what, I'm not just overwhelmed, I actually have something to give no matter what the circumstances are. So this is I do, like, I think when we're very stressed, it's maybe harder to think about, but this is something too, if regardless of where you are, you still have something to offer no matter what. So really to bring that out is very important. And the next is to activate positive emotion. So this is something I think I've been discussing with friends at different points. So is Netflix good in a pandemic? You know, is this a positive thing for so many of us who are spending so much time in front of the TV? And I honestly think so. This is one principle, the positive emotion. In some ways, yes. So in moderation, now during the pandemic, people are looking back to nostalgic things in terms of like watching the same TV show that they loved 10 years ago and watching it over and over again. Or, you know, we're finding more things in comfort and comfort food and comfort fashion for many and comfort TV. So doing small things like that can actually be very helpful. If you're feeling sort of stressed overwhelmed, to have 1 hour of your day where you're actually just doing something a bit mindless and just calming down that you know you're going to laugh for an hour or something is actually a very positive thing to do. Not recommending sort of you never leave the house or never talk to anyone, just do this 24/7, but doing something that's actually positive is not something you should feel as a guilty pleasure. It's actually something that can really be beneficial to you. For the sixth thing, so this is to cultivate an attitude of survivorship. So the idea being that there are many other people in history too who have gone through difficult times, whether it's different historical figures in the Second World War or during different pandemics, or people who have gone through medical issues or interpersonal. Like there are many different examples we can look at. So sometimes looking at these people and saying, you know what did they do? How did they actually overcome it in some way? How can I too take some of these qualities and be a survivor as well? And this sort of can maybe take us away when we're feeling really out of control and like we'll never make it, to say, you know what, someone else did it too. And it's not about sort of the suffering Olympics of like, oh, their thing was harder or my thing is harder, they would never understand. It's more saying, okay, what are the qualities that can actually help me get through this in some way? And the last thing is to seek meaning. So this is a bit, I find this because I don't actually think that there is always meaning to our suffering. I think that really horrible things can happen to any of us at any different point without meaning. So it's not, but even within that, I think trying to find a sense of meaning, personal meaning for yourself, is, you know what, I never would have chosen these circumstances. This is something that's beyond my control and something that I never would have chosen, but still maybe I can get something from it. Maybe I can help someone else who's going through something similar. Maybe I can discover a part of myself or a new hobby or a way to connect with others that I wasn't able to find before. And so trying to find some sort of meaning throughout this as well can build a sense of resilience over time, that it doesn't seem like the suffering is for nothing as well. So overall, these are sort of 7 ways to build your own resilience. And for the next slide, so I thought this was interesting as well to talk about. So how can you help children build resilience? So I know many of you are parents as well, and some of you now have your children at home 24/7 as well. So it's in that there's the balance of how do I take care of myself, but also how do I help children too, or grandchildren or great-grandchildren as well? How do I help them build resilience through these times? So the first thing sort of from this image is for the parent and child. So just to know overall, so one of the main things that helps children with resilience is having any sense of support. So any parent, any grandparent, aunt, uncle, whoever they have, if they have one person that they can really trust and turn to, this is one of the greatest predictors of resilience overall. So if you're even asking the question of like, how do I help my child, grandchild, great-grand, like be okay, they're already well poised to be resilient, that they actually have someone that cares about their well-being. The next thing that you can do is sort of to try things. So it's similar to how you'll do it for yourself too, but for a child also to increase their self-efficacy. So how to give a child self-confidence. So when they feel completely out of control, like the world may not seem so safe anymore, things aren't going so well, to make them feel like they have some sense of self-confidence that's in line with their age and what they're trying to do. So even something small, like you learned to tie your shoes today, you were able to do your Zoom class alone, you were able to bake with me, you were able to, so anything that you can actually find to say, look, you are growing, you are well, you are capable, that is actually very helpful in terms of building their sense of confidence and their sense of, I can actually make it through my life and I'll be okay as an adult as well. The third thing is to help them express their feelings in some way. So to really teach them to say, you know what, I'm like, to tell them, okay, look, you might be feeling lonely now. You don't get to see your friends. Feeling lonely is normal in this. So it's okay to feel lonely. It's okay to feel scared of going outside, of being in contact with people. It's okay to feel angry that you don't have the same things, that you can't play hockey anymore. You can't do the things they used to do. And so really helping them connect with the language and being able to express how they're feeling is also very helpful in terms of they won't be bottling it up and they'll actually be able to better understand what they're feeling. And the last thing, so this, like I had the song in my head whenever I see this picture, is really tradition. So a sense of culture and tradition for children is very, very important. So this really gives them a sense of identity, a sense of grounding, that they know that the same thing is going to happen at a certain time post. So things like actually, like, so we're talking at a Jewish event here. So things like, let's say, having a Shabbat dinner, keeping Shabbat can be very helpful, or any family tradition that you think is useful. So you could have pancakes on Sunday mornings, or Tuesday nights are movie nights or something, to give the kids some sort of grounding of, okay, every Tuesday night, I get to watch a movie. Maybe it's not my pick this week, it's mom or dad's pick. Next week will be my pick. And having that sense of continuity and saying, okay, we had the sense of togetherness that no matter what is going on in the world, Tuesday night will always be movie night. And so these are the 4 things overall that can be most helpful for helping children build resilience. So the next thing is how to build wellness. So this comes back to a bit of what I was talking about before in terms of the many different spheres of wellness. So Sheida will be walking us through some of the things that can actually be very helpful, from sleep to connection to staying active, training the brain, having sense of rest and relaxation, and also being mindful.
So sleep is one of the things that can be most affected by stress, as I was saying earlier. Sleep is actually a really important and complex process that our bodies go through every night, hopefully. And it's a process that actually involves many, many different regions of the brain, and there's different stages of sleep, which you may have heard of. There's more shallow stages, more deep stages of deep sleep, and there's also a stage called REM sleep, whereas actually we're dreaming. And these are all really, really important to help us form our memories, make our memories, and keep them over long term, and also kind of clean up the garbage that's accumulating in our brain every day. So it's a natural process that's evolved, of course, in humans and many other animals and beings as well. And it's a really fundamental phenomenon that we need to make sure we're doing properly. And so one way to have good sleep hygiene is to actually try to wake up at the same time every morning. That's probably one of the most important things we can do for ourselves to maintain good sleep habits, is to have that alarm and to try to keep that consistency and that routine in waking up and starting our day at the same time every morning. And similarly, trying to go to bed or fall asleep at the same time every night is also extremely beneficial. Of course, it can be more difficult when we have different things going on and we have different activities in different days of the week, or sometimes we're working later, or things with family go on longer. But trying to keep that routine of same hours of waking and sleeping can be extremely beneficial to having a good quality of sleep. The other thing is to try to reduce heavy physical activity right before bed. So going on an evening walk, especially after dinner, can be very nice, can be very relaxing, and can be beneficial. But maybe, avoiding having those really heavy gym sessions right before we're getting ready to go to bed. At the same time, having a routine while we're getting ready to go to bed can be very beneficial as well. So, whether it's taking a good book and then washing our face and brushing our teeth and then laying out clothes for tomorrow, whatever that routine might be for you, just getting your mind and your brain kind of trained in that habit of these are the steps I'm taking and now I'm getting ready for bed can be extremely beneficial. And of course, avoiding certain foods like alcohol or very heavy, greasy foods late at night, caffeine as well, can be detrimental to sleep. So a lot of people think, a glass of red wine makes me drowsy. That's the perfect thing to help me go to bed at night. In fact, alcohol actually disturbs sleep and it decreases the quality of sleep. It kind of maintains us in a state of shallower sleep. And so we don't get that good quality deep sleep and that dreamful state where we're creating dreams and making memories when we're consuming a lot of alcohol before bed. And of course, caffeine interferes with sleep as well. And finally, one of the things we've been talking about this whole evening has been stress. So stress can be deleterious to sleep. Sleep can kind of impact and worsen stress. So trying to just stay in that state of calm and use these tools that we're hopefully sharing with you today to take it back and kind of reduce your states of stress, whether it's big or small, that can also really impact sleep. The second thing that's really important is to connect with others, to connect through whatever means possible. So of course today, luckily we have technology that allows us to connect online, and we can go for walks outdoors. Whatever socializing looks like for you or for the circumstance, that's really important to keep in your daily routine or regular routine at least, because we know that social isolation is like a stressor to the body and to the brain. So as much as social connection is important and good, social isolation is bad. So we want to minimize that isolation, and we want to make sure we're connecting with others. And also having that sense of a network, having a sense of a social group and circle that we can interact with. It's extremely important to feel connected and also to be mentally stimulated. And so that's, one of the great benefits of being part of the Sisterhood and part of the Spanish and Portuguese and whatever other community that you're involved with, whether it's through a synagogue or through work or school or neighborhood, whatever that is. Really, really important to make sure that you keep a connection with others and to keep a good quality connection with others and really communicate. Related to this idea of having a strong social network is being able to have a group or a person that you can confide in and to speak up, especially when things are a little bit more difficult. I think a lot of us go through very similar experiences, and we react to things in very similar ways. And so sometimes when we feel like we're alone and we're the only one going through something, probably a lot of others are going through the same thing as well. And it can be really helpful to us and to our community to speak up and share with others and really try to talk about our challenges and our fears and our concerns. And the converse is true as well. Being part of the community also means if you notice that somebody that you're close to also seems a little bit down or a little bit off lately, speak up and just have a conversation and kind of build that connection and kind of work through it together. And that's all really important to helping us feel connected as social beings and be part of that community. The next thing, of course, is to stay active. And so, we have this new saying, sitting is the new smoking. And I'm the biggest culprit of this, working at my desk behind my computer several hours a day. And hours can go by and I realize I haven't moved once. And I think a lot of people more and more are becoming that way. And that's actually really harmful for the body. That's our bodies were meant to get up, move around, stretch, do activities. And I'll just show you an example scientifically. So aerobic exercise in particular. So things like, running or cycling or anything that's really going to get your heart rate pumping has many, many benefits on both your body and also your brain function. So, there's a lot of things going on in this slide, but the main takeaway here is that when you're exercising and when especially you're doing aerobic exercise, your brain is releasing good chemicals that are helping you build new brain cells, new connections between brain cells so that your brain can actually work more efficiently and communicate with itself more efficiently. It's increasing blood flow in your body and also in your brain specifically, and in networks that are associated with attention and with memory. So these are helping us actually stay mentally sharp by staying physically sharp. It's also helping actually increase our brain volume. So the regions in our brains actually get bigger and more dense, which is also extremely beneficial to us. And again, helps us kind of feed back into having a healthy mind, good state of mind, and having good mental sharpness. The other thing that we can do is train the brain more deliberately. And so when we talk, or when I talk about brain training, I'm thinking about these specific modules or programs that are commercially available, often for a computer or tablet version, but not necessarily. And there's a lot of different programs and types of products that exist out there. What they all have in common is that they essentially get the players to repeatedly practice a mental skill, whether that's a memory game or a concentration game. These different programs kind of bring all this together. They can be very specific, so sort of strategy training. So when you target one type of skill or one specific strategy to improve memory for lists, for example, or they can be very broad and gamified. And they can also target different functions. So some of them are for maintenance. So, you know, everybody's aging, everybody's busy and working and wants an edge. So play this game and you'll maintain brain function. Or it could be for more of a rehabilitative purpose. So if you have a brain injury or any kind of condition, for example, a very common one is ADHD or, you know, other similar behavioral conditions. These have games that are marketed to help them. And the kind of good and bad news is that there's mixed evidence for this. So there's definitely no one size fits all. There's no one game that is good for everybody and that everyone should be doing. There's no one game that's, you know, terrible at the same time. But the nice thing about this is that if this is something that you like doing, if this is something that you enjoy engaging with, video games, it's something that can be beneficial, but also, you know, not something that we have to make sure to integrate into our lives. One other thing associated with training the brain is strategy use. So not in the game sense, but just in our daily lives. So one thing that I'm sure all of us have heard a lot about is to make SMART goals. So SMART being an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And that's actually off of a very old theory of motivation called goal setting theory. And that's a theory that kind of combines the same concepts and it's the idea that we want to motivate ourselves at a level that is appropriate for us to get things done during the day. Whether, again, that's for work or for our personal lives, getting, you know, scheduling our daily routine for our family, for ourselves, making sure that our goals are very clear. So we have very, very specific things that we want to accomplish. That they are challenging enough that we are motivated to do them, but not too challenging that we are discouraged and don't want to even start the day or start on our list. That we can be committed to actually achieving, and that we have a way to feedback, to receive feedback for ourselves to see, you know, yesterday I had 3 things on my to-do list and I only got through 1. Maybe I have to reconsider the goals that I'm giving myself. Maybe I have to reconsider how big these goals are, or how big these tasks are, or how many I can actually accomplish in a reasonable amount of time. And related to that also is task complexity. So is this something that's going to be easy to do? Am I going to need, you know, other resources? Am I going to need more time to do this? So really all coming together is to be nice to yourself, be realistic with yourself. You know, try to get yourself to do things that are going to be motivating and helpful and organized, but also set your expectations at a level that is going to be manageable for yourself. Finally, resting and relaxing is extremely important as well for our brains and our bodies. So one nice way to relax relates to this theory called attention restoration theory, and that's essentially a nice way of saying, go out and spend time in nature. So we have a lot of things that demand our attention every day. We're, you know, on our emails and we're on phone calls and Zoom meetings and talking with our friends and family. Things come up and a lot of things come up. Sometimes we just need to unplug and relax. So being in nature, spending time in nature is one of the best ways that we can do this for our brain and kind of reset our brains to have that sense of calm. And if we can't be physically in nature, if we live in a country where it's snowing for 4 months and there isn't a lot of green around, or if we're stuck at home, or for whatever other reason, even looking at pictures of nature can be extremely beneficial. And going back to what Melanie was saying is, you know, take that Netflix break, have time in your day to do something that you enjoy, something like going to the spa or going on a trip if you can, or I know there's new technologies for recent times where we can't physically be away. We can take a virtual trip to a different city through apps and things like that. That can be extremely beneficial. And finally, the last thing that we can do for ourselves is to be mindful. So mindfulness practices are really based in helping us be grounded and grounding our mind and being present in the current moment, in the present time, and appreciating what is around us, or just being aware of what is around us. And there's many different ways to be mindful. You can do this through meditation, again, different types of meditation, and there are many different apps available that are free or subscription-based that you can follow along with to help meditate. One type in particular is called mindfulness-based stress reduction. is one type of mindfulness practice that is actually shown to activate the same regions that are impacted by stress. So I'm going to remind you of these 3 areas that we talked about being impacted by stress: the front of your brain, and then 2 structures kind of in the middle of your brain called the amygdala and the hippocampus that are impacted by stress. Well, they can actually be impacted by mindfulness-based practices as well in the opposite way. So mindfulness-based stress reduction can improve the CEO of your brain, that prefrontal cortex that helps you understand appropriate behaviors and regulate emotions, and also the part that's regulating your memory and helping you form memories, and actually kind of set down that middle portion, the amygdala, that's responsible for our emotional responses and our fear responses. So kind of tone that down and amp up the other aspects. And as a bonus, the nice thing to keep in mind is that we really want to be enjoying the activities we're engaging in. So, you know, different things that we presented today and even additional things. So practicing yoga, doing some gardening, spending time with family, listening to music, or even better, playing music, learning different languages and engaging in people of different cultures and languages, solving a puzzle, or just, again, spending time with family, or doing something creative, painting or doing arts and crafts. All these things can be extremely beneficial for our minds and for our brains, and therefore for our bodies and our general state of well-being. So just kind of to recap everything that we've talked about this evening, remember that stress can impact your body, can affect your immune system and your health, and also your brain and how you're performing and behaving every day. But not all stress is bad. And in fact, a little bit of stress is very important and helps us be motivated to achieve wonderful things and helps us build that cognitive reserve. So keep that mental acuity. There's many different ways to build resilience, and really the key is to pick something that you enjoy, that works for you, not necessarily to try to do everything. Although physical health is one of the important ones, physical health can affect your mental health and vice versa. So whatever is good for your body, good for your brain, and vice versa. So yeah, just a good reminder for myself: constantly get up and stretch if you've been sitting for several hours, and ideally, if possible, schedule an evening walk, or even better, an exercise a few times a week. That's really important, not just for your body, also for your brain and mental health. Make manageable goals. If you can, make them SMART goals so that you can actually have a way to kind of measure them and keep them realistic. And if you're going to plan something that you kind of see as work that you don't really enjoy doing, do something that you enjoy beforehand. It can get us more motivated to actually start the day and start tackling those tasks that might be less fun to do. And finally, very important to check in with yourself and kind of make sure that you know and you're aware of what is manageable for you, where you are at mentally, because living healthy is very key for having a healthy mind.
I'll briefly touch on some resources, then we'll open it up for questions. So one thing so this is just more in terms of many different things we've talked about. So if you're interested in more things about meditation or mindfulness too, John Kabat-Zinn and Sharon Salzberg have written some wonderful books about it. If you're interested in more of the neurological aspects also of brain training, Sheida also has a book about it too. In terms of peer groups, so I was recently invited to different groups that I actually really appreciate, so I'll just sort of shout out for one of them. One of them was the meditation for many friends too, so doing things like that can be very helpful. Also, someone else invited me to Pilates classes or doing things like virtual things. So whatever you can do, honestly, if you're wondering if you're interested in it, to reach out to some of your friends and say, look, would anyone like to do it? Even honestly, even if people don't always do it, they appreciate the sentiment. I think now is sort of the time to reach out as much as possible. Different web and mobile apps are also very helpful. So things like for yoga, meditation, mindfulness, there's a lot of apps now out there. There's also, honestly, anything that you're interested in now, I find that you can find it online in terms of how you could find other groups that can do this with you too. If you are struggling more, someone you love is struggling a bit more with mental illness or the difficulty, Ami Quebec is a very good resource for that too. So finding more targeted help in cases like that. So we'll open it up now for questions. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll leave it to Grace.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Sheida, for a beautiful talk. I'll thank you properly after the questions and answer period. We're going to take about 15 minutes of questions. There are 3 ways to ask a question. You can do it the old-fashioned way and raise your hand, and we will look for you and ask you to unmute yourself. You can click at the bottom right-hand corner on the reaction, or you could text it in the chat. We have our first question from Evelyn Shaheen. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, Evelyn.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned not all stress are bad. Of course, you mean the physical, not physical, mental stress. Could you give more example for that, please?
I'll give her a moment to come on too, but to touch on a little bit of that. So in terms of, Evelyn, your question was more about what is good stress? There isn't? Yeah, okay. So meaning that having a little bit of stress, so having, let's say, a deadline that you want to do something, or saying, you know what, I'm actually going to challenge myself with, you know, it's a little bit stressful to learn how to play chess, let's say, you know, and you're sort of stressed as you're playing and you're not sure if you're going to win. So that sort of stress can actually be good in terms of actually challenging yourself. So to put yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone, also physically, it's the same idea that you're not going to be building muscle if you don't increase the weight a little bit or increase the time that you're exercising. So adding a little bit more of a challenge to whatever your daily activity is very good for both for the brain and the body. What you don't want is, let's say, to sort of also just to give the exercise example, that your first day at the gym, you pick up 100 pounds and it's way too much and you end up injuring yourself. So it could be the same sort of idea in terms of life stress, that having a little bit of stress in terms of having to meet deadlines, in terms of, you know, a little bit of difficult things going on with what's going on in your life can be helpful. But if it's major stresses for extended periods of time, that can be much harder to manage.
Yeah, thank you, Mel. Is my sound better now?
Much better.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I really like that idea of the parallel between physical stress and you know, mental stress and the gym, and you wouldn't go pick up 100 pounds right away. I'll give you the converse situation as well. So if we have nothing going on in our lives, no stress, we have no interactions with people, nothing planned for the day, no job, no work, nothing to do, that's boring, right? We're not motivated to do anything. We have nothing to do. We're just sitting around stagnant. That's not good for us either. And that's not something that probably we're happy with either. So the idea is really just to keep things in your life balanced in a way that you want to have a little bit of pressure. You want to have a little bit of challenge for yourself to grow and to plan things and engage in activities and do things that maybe scare you a little bit, maybe, you know, challenge you in different ways, but to a degree that you can actually accomplish and achieve, not something that feels completely insurmountable. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. We have another question on the floor. Gail Gross. I just lost her. Hold on. Please unmute yourself. Okay, Beverly, unmute yourself.
This is Joe, actually, Beverly's husband. So my question is as follows. Perfect presentation, by the way, guys. So on one side, you say coping mechanism to stress is the mindfulness with John Kabat-Zinn and Sharon Salzberg, etc., in order to be in the present, not live in the past, and not live in the future, right? Another coping mechanism that you said was, you know, to watch old movies or watch Netflix, which is a complete not reality. So what is a healthy level, and can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I can touch on it. I think that's a great question too, because I think it really is that they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. So it's like, should I be working myself? Should I be relaxing? Should I be trying to relax? Should I? And it is sort of, it does seem conflicting in one way, but also I do think the idea behind it is moderation too. So it also depends on, so there's two things. One is moderation, that too much of anything. So also even too much meditation can actually it can actually be harmful too. So that there have also been studies on that. So it's really everything with some sense of moderation. But the other thing is it also depends on where you're at. So in terms of where you are with your own level of stress in that moment. So if you're feeling slightly less stressed, it's a good time to actually be pushing yourself a little bit more, to say, you know what, I can take on a little bit more in my life right now. So maybe it is a time when you should be, you know, trying to meditate a little bit more to see if you can actually develop that sense of calm even more. And when you have way too much stress, maintaining the meditation is still very important. It's the time when it's actually most important, but saying, you know what, I maybe need a little more downtime now too. So downtime in sense of meditation, but also, you know what, now is the time when I maybe should just be watching an hour of TV if I need to as well, and not beating yourself up saying, well, this is mindless activity, I shouldn't be doing this. So that is also okay. And that's kind of the times when it's almost like a virtual hug, you know, just like, this is what I need right now. I'm going through a bit too much. Watching Friends tonight is my virtual hug. That's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Sheida. Do we have another question on the floor? Rosie Sharabani, please unmute yourself.
Hi guys, thank you so much. Nell, who I know your parents, and Sheida, who I don't, but congratulations. My question is really strange. I want to talk about the stress of procrastination, because when you talked about the good stress, which is a deadline to do something, that's the only thing that works for me in my life to get something done, is the deadline. But it doesn't mean that, like, while I'm procrastinating, I'm not stressed. There's a lot of stress in that, but it's only the deadline that gets me. So can you guys help me out with that kind of stress? Do you know what I'm saying? Or maybe just...
Yeah, I feel like I connect with that on a very personal level. I'm exactly the same way. So, I mean, I can talk anecdotally and I can talk a little bit more broadly, but yeah, I think just going back, having that, know where to begin. I don't know if that's a little bit getting to what you're talking about as well. I think we've all been there. I've certainly been there. And that's really where finding strategies that work for you to kind of break it down and motivate yourself to start with one thing, that can be really effective. And so, you know, when you have a presentation coming up and a report that's due and you have a call at this time, you know, you have to schedule your day around the things that you can control and the things that are going to happen regardless, and try to break it down. Because the worst case scenario is if you're procrastinating and you have all these things to do and you don't know where to start, nothing gets done, right? So doing one small thing is better than doing nothing at all and just thinking about all the big things that are, you know, on the list. So one thing that I found very effective, and that's kind of based in some of these theories that I've been researching and I talked a little bit about today, is really to just make a list. It's so simple, it's so silly almost to say, but it's just to break down in a very organized way, to write down all the things that are kind of burdening your mind and make that list as long as it needs to be, and then just kind of section out, okay, this is something I can do right away. This is something that's not so important. I'm going to forget about it for now. And it's also okay to drop things completely. I do that all the time. I have, you know, this, let's say this really cool article I wanted to write, or this really cool study I wanted to design, which is, you know, maybe really exciting, but also really daunting. And life gets in the way and you have other things that are important and other deadlines that come up. And maybe you have to shelve that for a little bit, and that's okay. And that happens all the time. So yeah, so it's really just the idea of getting everything out on paper or on your screen or whatever, so it's not just living in your mind, and then try to organize it in a way that's really manageable, and start small. So making those goals really, really tiny so you can actually cross that thing off. Actually, I have a friend whose first thing that he does always when he makes a to-do list is to check off, write a to-do list. Like that's always his first item. So you can mentally have that check mark that you've done something today.
Thank you. Melanie, you have a question?
Yeah, I received a very good question actually about elderly people in homes now who are more isolated. And that's sort of a very relevant question of what can we do now? That for many people who, I think for, you know, some of us are lucky enough to either be living with people or have some being able to go out in some way too. But for some of the people who are having more difficulty, mainly for elderly people who might live alone, who are more socially isolated, more at risk also for COVID, so maybe more afraid of going out. The question is what can we do in these circumstances? So I think that I do think honestly, even the government of Quebec sort of said, you know, we need at least one caregiver to go in, even with the COVID response, which I think is even just sort of people recognizing that having no social contact is really detrimental. So you need at least one person to be able to go in. And this comes down to also that it's a sort of managed risk, saying having at least one person going in is better for their mental health than having no one. So trying to make sure that there is at least one caregiver is sort of the minimum that we can do. Beyond that, trying to figure out, okay, what if I can't physically be there? What is the person able to do? Can they answer the phone? Can they go on an iPad? Can they, if they're not able to do that, is there something else that they can do that's a bit different? So can they care for a plant? Can they have something else, having a pet at home if they're able to care for it as well? So finding other ways to actually bring stimulation into the home if they're not able to have other people. So I think that finding and just trying to adapt it in any way, so that if they're able to read, just making sure that if they would like things with larger font, or if it's more of an audiobook, or just finding any way to really stay as mentally fit and socially connected as possible. There's no easy answer for this. And I know I'm not saying anything that's sort of revolutionary overall, but I think that we can keep trying the best that we can. And I think that honestly, whatever we can do, and if they do need more help, I think honestly, so asking for more help too is very helpful too, and to see if circumstances do have to be adjusted, that this person is really not doing well if they're so isolated, to see if there's anything else that can be added to care for them.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well then, what can I say? Thank you so much to Dr. Melanie Bilbul and Dr. Sheida Rabipour for offering their time to the Spanish and Portuguese Sisterhood. You guys were amazing, and much needed talk during COVID times, and actually all times. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. I want to thank as well Françoise Baboulot and Viola Tolchinsky and Linda Abudi for all their great support from the office. As well, my co-chair, Rachel Gabay, who we couldn't have done without. Please unmute yourselves, applaud, and say what you want to say. We are going to make sure you're able to unmute yourselves.
Well, I can unmute myself. So thank you again for having us. It's really been a pleasure. I love giving these talks, yeah, always great to see everyone and interact with everyone and get all these great questions. And so yeah, thank you guys, really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Whoa.
Bravo.
Before
Yeah.
everyone leaves, we have another Super Tuesday next week with Cantor Ben Lolo, and he's going to talk to us about music and how it helps the mind and the soul. So I hope to see you all next week as well. Thank you again, Melanie. Sheida. What an amazing evening.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
It was amazing. Kola kabod, Melanie. And
So much, Melanie and Sheida, and thank you, Grace, for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Rachel.
The life of
Did you tell us about your book? Would you like to tell us about your book?
How many people are on? Sure. It's kind of it's a book with an academic publisher that I wrote with my previous supervisor, and it basically talks about kind of gets more into the scientific background of different brain training programs that exist, where they all originated, and kind of what might work best for different types of people. So whether you're, a healthy, regular person, or you're afraid of, the effects of aging, or if you're going through, a behavior or a mental health issue, kind of talks about kind of a spectrum of different programs, but also different strategies that can be used, and kind of what is the science behind them.
Thank you. If you want to buy her book, I will send out an email with a link, and you can ask the Sisterhood or the Spanish and Portuguese, and we'll get you connected.
Where
with
are the chats?
Data.
Yeah, chat.
Where?
That's one.
You're amazing.
The question?
Thank you so much for doing this for our community.
It's really an honor to be invited and really a pleasure to see everyone.
Yeah, agreed.
Same here, left.
So much.
Close.
Nobody wants to leave, Melanie and Sheida.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Okay, and thank you, Grace, for organizing such great events. Thank you all.
I hope you'll all join us. We have something every Tuesday night until the end of March. And it's all linked to health, or of course Purim in the middle of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
again.
Melanie.
And stay strong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful
Stay
presentation.
strong. It was fantastic. Very informative. Thank you very much.